Just a quick heads up, spoilers to everything Final Fantasy VII related in 3, 2, 1. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's first chapter is incredible, in my opinion. It is a very faithful recreation of the Nibelheim flashback from the original, but it just adds so much more like intrigue and depth. There's so many new hints about the underlying story being unreliable narration coming from Cloud. I mean, a list of great things about it I could just keep rambling on and on about. I mean, it's got a fantastic boss fight, Materia Guardian, and it has one of the coolest game mechanic debuts I've ever seen in a video game with synergy abilities. Sephiroth himself is just really, really cool to play as and feel his general overall power. And just the general burning of Nibelheim sequence just really impacts you. It's actually insane how good this chapter is because it's not just the Nibelheim story, but it also has to do sort of double, triple duty of like being a tutorial for people who have never played FF7 Remake, and also being sort of a refresher for people coming back from Remake playing this game for the first time. However, despite all this, there is still one notable thing missing from the flashback and Rebirth. Where's the dragon, Square Enix? You know, the big green and purple dragon from the original? Does this not ring any bells for anybody? Okay, so some people might need a little bit of a refresher. So in the original FF7 Nibelheim flashback sequence, when Cloud and Sephiroth get ambushed in the truck and have to go out and fight whatever monster, it is this big dragon that they have to fight. And you as Cloud really can't do anything against this dragon. Like, you cannot really deal any damage whatsoever. But Sephiroth, who you cannot control, just single-handedly, like, easily defeats it. No problem whatsoever. A lot of the purpose of this sequence is to really establish Sephiroth as a threat. It really sets the power level of the kind of guy that we're dealing with. That even in the past, that he was super duper strong. That all the enemies that you have fought as a party prior in the original FF7 really are not comparable to this big intimidating dragon. So you really have a big uphill battle to climb in order to reach Sephiroth's level. And you really don't even like fight anything quite comparable until I want to say like Temple of the Ancients in the original, when you actually do start fighting dragons and stuff. Now, the same sort of encounter happens in Rebirth, but the truck instead gets ambushed by these Disgorgons, sort of cannon fodder enemies in the grander scheme of things. Now, it is a bit deflating compared to the dragon in the original, but there are so many like game design changes that happened in Rebirth that I think it is an understandable change to make. Now, the first big obvious change is that they decided to make Sephiroth playable in FF7 Rebirth to get you to feel that power of Sephiroth, but in a sort of different way, rather than just seeing him on the sidelines just crush everything in his path, that you actually get to control him and use all of that power for yourself. But when you're keeping the story as accurate as possible to the original, then that means that getting out of that truck as Sephiroth is going to be a tutorial sequence inherently, because dragon enemies in Rebirth just tend to be some of the harder enemies in the game in general. So trying to really water a dragon like that down for a tutorial just seems really counterproductive as to what makes those enemies really interesting and fun to fight. Plus, if you water down a dragon that much in order to be like a tutorial boss, then when you fight dragons way later on in Rebirth, it's not gonna feel as intimidating to encounter them. It's like, oh, you mean that thing that I just beat up like when I was just button mashing and had no idea what I was doing as Sephiroth? That's kind of lame. So to me, I think the decision to cut the dragon from the intro was a reasonable choice given the direction that the developers decided to go. That they wanted to keep the spirit of the Nibelheim chapter in this sort of new action game type system, while also still having to conform and deal with the fact this is like the very beginning of a brand new game. The removal of the OG dragon encounter is understandable, but it is very bizarre within the context of Rebirth overall, in a game that really loves to celebrate many other similar small moments throughout the original 7, and just really put a spotlight on them and celebrate them in a exciting new way. I mean, compare this to literally the next chapter later when you encounter the Midgard-Stormer. Just how much love and attention gets put into this Midgard-Stormer encounter, and how they keep Snake getting snapped on the pike moment from the original, but recontextualize it for the remake universe. So the cutting of the dragon just feels odd. What's very bizarre is that Rebirth does call back to the original Nibelheim dragon encounter multiple times throughout the game. The first reference to it is in chapter 11 when you're climbing up the mountain and you're going to check on those Wutai soldiers at the reactor. That you do actually encounter a dragon on your way up to the reactor. And it is a very cool fight and stuff like that, and it feels appropriately placed for this point in the game. It's the closest thing in Rebirth to that original dragon. And the other time that they reference it is in Sephiroth's combat challenge, that the 4th round of Sephiroth's combat challenge, you actually fight a dragon that kind of looks similarly colored to the original. Now, knowing that there are dragons like this in Rebirth, we can do this moment without compromising the intended game design of Chapter 1 of Rebirth. Now, how exactly? The way to get around Chapter 1's tutorial design constraints is just by putting the dragon only in hard mode. That since hard mode relies on you having a player character that is fully leveled up and having all of the materia ready to go, then you should know how to fight a dragon reasonably at this point. So throwing a late game enemy into the first chapter in hard mode, I think would actually work very well for that difficulty. To me, I feel like this is actually a very brilliant change, that just changing one enemy's placement in the very beginning chapter just sets an entirely different tone for hard mode going forward. That you can feel a little safe playing hard mode in 7 Remake games, knowing that it's just going to be the same enemies but harder. But if you put the dragon at the beginning of Chapter 1, or in Chapter 1 in general, that it's like, wait a minute, this enemy wasn't here, and so now you kind of have to like sort of like prepare mentally in sort of a different way, expect the unexpected, which is what the narrative of the game also is trying to do, of mess with your expectations. It's brilliant. Really, the only big hurdle that I see why the developers didn't do something like this is because, like, just putting a dragon in would require a little bit different dialogue and a little bit different, like, way the cutscenes are set up compared to putting the Disgorgons in. And so that would take extra time and money and getting the voice actors to do more lines and stuff like that, yada yada. But I think naturally incorporating the dragon into that first sequence just for hard mode, I think would be really, really awesome in just messing with the player's expectations. It's like, wait a minute, this is not the cutscene that I played on the lower difficulty. What is going on? And add to that factor of like, okay, I have no idea what I'm going to expect. But even if the developers didn't want to do this because time, resources, money, extra effort for what a small amount of players would see, you could still very easily put the dragon in Chapter 1. There is a combat arena right before the Materia Guardian where you fight this zoo. And it is a big enough arena that I think that if you took the dragon, just plopped it in there and maybe sized up a little bit, it would work perfectly fine. I mean, it already has a properly sized arena for it. It doesn't mess with the cutscene scenario stuff that already is developed and established, and you get to mess with people's expectations going into hard mode. Like, oh, are they gonna just shuffle around all of these enemies and stuff, late game enemies into earlier game spots, and just really mess with players? So anyways, guys, that's it for the video. I liked making this video quite a lot. I just kind of came up with it off the top of my head. And it's such a hyper niche thing, but I love talking about these very hyper niche things within Rebirth because I feel like nobody else is really making videos on them. So it's a fun sort of space to play in. So just tell me down below, did you miss the dragon in Rebirth? Did you even not notice that the dragon was missing? Comment down below on what you think about my idea. Hit like if you want to see more content like this. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. And hit up my Patreon down in the description if you want to give me a little bit of money to compensate me for making videos like this. Anyways, that's it. And have a good day.